Are U.S. dollars propping up the Soviet system? Financing perestroika, a revealing report, next on the 700 Club. With Pat Robertson and Sheila Walsh. Now with news on the cutting edge, here is Pat Robertson.
Well, thank you and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. You've heard a lot about perestroika. You've heard a lot about glasnost. Most of us don't really know what these buzzwords mean. But what is developing is that the Soviet Union is a third world country. Its economy may be as much as a quarter of what we had originally figured. It's probably a quarter of the United States. We thought it was half of the United States total economy. And what's happened is a massive military machine built essentially on no economy at all. We're going to be looking into who's paying the bill for perestroika. What else we got?
Well, also ahead, we'll meet a former Wall Street broker who lost everything he had and then made quite a gain. And we'll hear how a young man voted most likely to succeed nearly lost everything. All this after these items in the news.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Soviet Union is faced with its most serious economic crisis since the 1920s. Worsening shortages and ethnic strife have sparked growing public unrest. Soviet health is a shambles, with falling male life expectancy, rising infant mortality, and a staggering 40% alcoholism rate. If Mikhail Gorbachev hopes to salvage the Soviet system through perestroika, he has to have money. The problem is, for us, he's getting it. As Gary Lane reports, some of that money could be coming out of your pocket.
The Soviet economy is mired in stagnation. Western loans and trade are needed to revive it, and many Western bankers and businessmen are very happy to oblige. In part, says Congressman Toby Roth, because Western banks are very liquid.
The Far East doesn't need the money. Europe doesn't need the money. So there's only one avenue left, and that's the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union.
And the Soviets are getting those loans at fire sale rates, with little, if any, questions asked. That angers Roth and others in Congress.
You go into the bank, banker is going to ask you, what are you going to do with this money? How are you going to repay it? And there's a hefty interest charge. But with the Soviet Union, billions of dollars are given. No one asks how they're going to be repaying it. No one asks what they're going to do with the money. And the interest is only 7.5%.
Western banks in 1988 are lending to the communist East Bloc at the rate of $2 billion per month, almost half of that going to the Soviets. Total indebtedness to the West stands at roughly $135 billion. And since the early 1980s, the majority of new loans to the Soviets have been untied to a specific use, meaning they can be used for anything, including the military. So why do communist governments get loans at terms that American farmers and businessmen can only dream of? Bankers say the Soviets have a history of paying their bills, and they feel that Moscow is a good credit risk. But their recent massive borrowing alarms some East-West trade experts, like Dr. Juliana Garan-Palan, who doubts the Soviets could export enough goods to ever repay their debts.
The recent skyrocketing, I would have to say, enormous amount of borrowing from the Soviet Union should make a lot of bankers more nervous. And it just doesn't seem that that has clicked.
Journalist Saul Sanders, who has just returned from several weeks in Europe, researching his forthcoming book on East-West trade, says the one Western nation that may know the Soviets better than any other, Finland, will not deal with the Soviets right now, because Finnish leaders don't think Gorbachev can salvage the system.
They're skeptical of Gorbachev's intentions, and they're pessimistic about his ability to restructure the economy so that it works better, and they're very cautious about any initiatives.
But U.S. banks and businessmen can't afford to gamble because they can write off their losses. That means American taxpayers will be forced to pick up the tab twice, because as the Soviet military benefits with loans and credits, Americans will be paying even more for defense. Many Western bankers believe the Soviets under Mikhail Gorbachev have finally seen the light and that the Cold War is over. Palan calls this view of Gorbachev naive.
I find that many businessmen are simply euphoric about what is going on in the Soviet Union today, and they really think that capitalism is just around the corner.
But the facts are that under Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet military has undergone a massive modernization program. Soviet military spending is still, by some estimates, as much as 4 times that of the United States.
So far as we can see, the Soviet Union has not changed its expansionist intentions. And that, I think, at the moment is the bottom line. We have, in other words, no sufficient reason to relax our vigilance.
I don't see anything in Gorbachev's background that makes him Saul on the road to Damascus. I think what he does understand is that if present conditions in the Soviet Union continue, present economic conditions, they'll be in deep trouble.
It remains to be seen what line the Bush administration will take on untied loans and joint ventures with the Soviets. In a November 8th edition of the French newspaper Le Figaro, the president-elect was quoted as saying, "We don't want untied loans or credits. We want Gorbachev to make hard choices and pull back from military spending." But the new Secretary of State of the Bush administration, former Treasury Secretary James Baker, has gone on record more than once as favoring loans and credits to the East Bloc. If the Bush administration doesn't act against untied loans and credits, there's a good chance that the 101st Congress will. Both Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate want to make sure that the burden of financing perestroika is shouldered by the Soviet military and not by American taxpayers. Gary Lane, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Gary.
Pat, how did this get to this position, so out of hand without a check being put on it?
Well, somehow bankers have always wanted to make money, but there seems to be almost something beyond that, because we're going to have a piece in just a minute about rising interest rates in the United States, but we're giving interest rates to those guys at below market rates for 30 and 40-year credits. It's insane. There's no way that the bankers can make any money on these things.
How can we, as responsible United States citizens, give them billions of dollars and not ask what they're going to do with it? It's like Little Red Riding Hood sharing her picnic basket with the wolf. Well, to me.
I don't know whether it's muddle-headed or whether they somehow feel that they're going to control the world by having these people in their debt. One French banker was heard to say, well, we hope the Soviets take over the Middle East oil. We can deal with them. They owe us money. And it's somehow they think that if they're a creditor or a debtor, the bankers are creditors and these people are debtors. But Sheila, the problem that has developed is the Soviets have been lying about the economy for many years, and they've been overstating the value of the ruble. Right now in the black market, rubles are going for about 6 rubles to $1. It used to be thought that the ruble was worth at least as much as $1, maybe more. So if you have figures stated in rubles, then you say, well, they're at least half as big as the United States, maybe 2/3 as big as the United States. Now they're saying, no, they may be only 1/3 as big an economy as ours. Now, if you project that economy great big, what it looks like is the Soviets are spending maybe 12–13% on defense. But if you shrink it to the real size, what it says is they're spending 25, 26, maybe 27% of their gross national product on defense. And the United States, by comparison, is spending about 7% on defense. So we're looking at when Gary said 3 times as much, it's not 3 times as much in absolute dollars, it's 3 times as much a percentage of their economy. Now, they can't afford that. So 2 things have got to happen. The United States has got to stop building weapons and take troops out of Europe to let them cut their cost of their military. And secondly, the amount of money we give is going to prop up their military, because these are unbundled loans. So we've got to tie the loans. It seems like to me to human rights, we ought to insist they stop persecuting Christians, let the Jewish refuseniks go to Israel, open their society more, and renounce aggression against countries like Nicaragua and Afghanistan and Angola and some of these other places where their surrogates are moving around. It's the time to squeeze now. When you've got somebody in that condition, you can squeeze hard. Gorbachev is a public relations master. A guy is absolutely broke, and he comes in with a big smile on his face, and everybody thinks, isn't he a hero? He's desperate. There are no goods in the Soviet stores. There's nothing to sell. The people are desperately poor. Interesting.
Well, here at home, interest rates may keep right on climbing in the near future. Some economic analysts believe the Federal Reserve Board is trying to raise interest rates in order to slow down the economy and prevent inflation from rising. That could mean the prime interest rate would rise from 10.5% to 11%, and consumer lending rates would rise along with it.
Which could hurt the stock market pretty heavily. And it's one of those things that we're discounting, but it could be a serious thing. Long-term interest rates are still in the 9%, 9.25% range, so we've got what's called an inverted yield curve. But hold on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen. It can be a rough ride economically in 1989. Well, Muammar Gaddafi, he's in the news again. He says Wednesday's air battle between U.S. and Libyan jets was American terrorism backed by brute force. Gaddafi wants the UN Security Council to meet to discuss the incident. Meanwhile, the U.S. is debating about whether or not to attack a plant in Libya capable of producing chemical weapons. The U.S. is apparently leaning against a military strike because the European allies won't think it a good idea. I understood in one newscast last night that the British now have discovered information which backs up the American claims. Before, the Europeans were saying we didn't have enough information to back that up. But to have a madman like Gaddafi with chemical weapons in his hands, he could terrorize his neighbors in Africa and all over the Middle East. It'll be a very, very dangerous thing. What else?
Well, several new studies suggest there may be an increase in breast cancer among women under the age of 45 who have used the birth control pill. Although earlier research cleared the pill of a cancer link, a Federal Drug Administration panel is discussing whether a new warning label should be added to oral contraceptive prescriptions. The pill is the most widely used contraceptive in the U.S. The incidence of breast cancer has increased over the last decade for no apparent reason, with about 42,000 women dying of breast cancer each year.
They should have mammograms. It's
the only responsible thing to do, really, once you're over 30.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, on this program, we're going to meet a college student who was struggling with life, what to do in his life. We're also going to look at Liberia, some smiles on Africa's west coast right after this message. Stay tuned.
A leadership role isn't something you just back into. It takes the right education and lots of hard work. If no one had told these graduates about CBN University, they might not have master's degrees in fields like business and communication, nor the training that turns God's followers into leaders. Do you know someone who should hear about CBNU? Call now. It's in your hands.
Your legacy. You may not control substantial holdings, but because it represents the fruit of your labor, it's priceless to you. Yet, if you die without a will, the courts will determine how your estate is distributed, and this could be disastrous for your heirs. For a free brochure on how a will can help you avoid a legal nightmare, write to Christian Financial Planning, creating tomorrow's legacies today.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Pat, how much do you know about a country like Liberia? I have to be honest and say I know nothing at all.
Well, Liberia is an interesting country because it was an attempt to give the slaves in America a homeland. So we, back in the days of the early part of America, shipped a number of slaves to Africa, gave them their freedom. And Liberia, in the old days, was very closely tied to America. But they've had a coup over there, and it's right now you don't know anything. It's shrouded in darkness.
And tremendous poverty. Well, like so much of the African continent, as Pat said, there's a lot of mystery. It's dominated by witchcraft. But into this darkness, light is really breaking. Kathy Sindoff brings us this report of World Watch.
mystery surrounds the African country, Liberia. There, strong tribal ties keep most foreigners outside looking in. Yet it wasn't always like that. More than 100 years ago, American-freed slaves set out for this West African country, dreaming of a coastal paradise. By working hard and keeping the faith of their parents, many of those dreams came true, until the 80s brought a series of financial setbacks. Everyone felt the crunch, even Monrovia, the capital city. JFK Hospital, the National Teaching and Referral Center, had almost become a ghost town. When Operation Smile, a team of plastic surgeons and medical volunteers offered to help, Dr. Naganan challenged his people.
Help us help ourselves. And it seemed to have touched a lot of people.
The Liberians now are starting to take that right up. Their kindergarten children collected pennies and managed to get $800 to help buy bed sheets and some necessary equipment. Their businesses started to contribute.
Liberians were motivated to help themselves by the great needs they saw all around them. 65% of the country is not able to pay for health care. Yet the Liberian doctors knew that they were facing more than overwhelming poverty.
In our society, you see, especially cleft lips and palates and other deformities are attributed to witchcraft and infidelity of either the husband or the wife. So we explain these things to them and tell them this is a normal thing, it's a natural phenomenon, okay, it can happen to anybody, it's not witchcraft, so please come and let's help you.
When Operation Smile came from the U.S., Operation Smile Liberia was ready. A few handshakes later, the joint team was on its way to restoring pride to JFK Hospital and hope for hundreds of people. Children like Lydia, whose father is a pastor and was grieved that he couldn't afford to have Lydia's palate repaired.
She could not pronounce some words. Even in our own dialect, there were some words that she could hardly pronounce. Secondly, it was very hard for her to eat, you know, the hard food like rice and meat, and sometimes I would chew it before I give to her.
But last year she was taken to the Operation Smile team for surgery, and now she speaks much better. Lydia's problem was relatively easy to correct, but many Liberians suffer with far worse conditions, like this young man who could no longer open his mouth. Such was the case with James Toe.
James Toe had this infection that we call cancrum oris that had eaten away half of his jaw and half of his upper lip and has completely locked the jaw. The way he fed himself was to put rice, force the rice along the beak, along the cheek, okay, and then punch it with the fingers till it's soft, and then he tries to swallow. This is the way this boy has been feeding himself for years.
What a surprise when staff member Katie Horton saw him a year later.
That is great. Here you have a girlfriend.
Yes.
But of all the cases, it was the infant bitten by rats that proved Operation Smile Liberia was a force to be reckoned with. After being treated, it was discovered that the mother did not have enough food for the child. So every mother who had had her child operated on was asked to give a little milk.
And in fact, that's what happened.
What did you feel like the chances for the baby's survival were?
I'll be honest with you, I thought that, I told many people, I said, I don't think there's any way this baby will survive.
But thanks to the commitment of the Liberian medical team, the baby thrived and was discharged 6 months later. By this time, everyone in the country had heard of Operation Smile, even President Doe, who came to the hospital to see what people were talking about.
We want to say that we are forever grateful to you for this kind of wonderful job that you are doing for our people. And we will do our best to make sure that this kind of program continues.
So from the head of state to the people, a message is being given.
I think the message of Operation Smile has really gone down to the people. That is, people must help people.
I think Christianity is a reality. Christianity makes the difference between what human relationship ought to be. And it is only that one thing that will bring peace in this world. We have to learn to believe in God, believe in what Jesus said, because those teachings of our Jesus Christ are real. Say, help your neighbor. Love thy neighbor like you love yourself.
Isn't that marvelous?
It's wonderful, Pat. How did Operation Smile get started?
Well, Dr. McGee and some of the associates with Dr. Horton here at the Plastic Center Hospital in Norfolk decided they wanted to go over to the Philippines. And he came to see me and asked if we would pay the bill. And I said, sure, we'll be glad to do that. The doctors go for free. They give their time, and that's what's really valuable. Well, we got airplane tickets and the accommodations in the Philippines, and then we gave some support services. And according to Dr. McGee, we paid 100% of his budget the first year, then about 50% the second year, and maybe 25% the third year. We still make a substantial contribution to them, but more and more the thing has just grown tremendously, and he's gathered together many, many other dedicated plastic surgeons. You know, that kind of surgery is very expensive. If it was done in the States, I mean, we're talking about $5,000, $10,000 on one of those reconstructions, and they give that away over there. Yeah. And then Dr. Horton, who's one of the great plastic surgeons in America, one of the 10 leading plastic surgeons, he's innovated all kinds of things, breast reconstructions, various other types of reconstructive surgery, microsurgery. He and another team went to Haiti, and they went over to the Middle East, to Jordan, to Syria, to Israel, and we helped a substantial amount on that too. So it's a great partnership. These are marvelous men, and I'm so excited that we can have a small role in it.
And the way they're teaching the people to care for each other, not just giving help, but teaching them. The way the mothers shared their milk with that mother who wasn't able to feed her baby, who'd been bitten by rats. And to bring hope, it's just a wonderful, caring
You see that little child with that enormously distended navel. You see this one with the bone. We had one that was brought in here. He had a growth that was, you know, at least a foot long, and we were able to bring him over from the Philippines. They operated, and he became all right. He came to see me before he left.
Really?
Beautiful Christian guy, and it's just exciting to see that not only is the medical activity going, but it's touching their hearts. They're finding Jesus as well. So again, ladies and gentlemen, that's one of the things that CBN is assisting in. But how grateful we are to people like Dr. Reed and Dr. Horton and many of these others who give of their time so sacrificially, a couple of weeks a year. And they work like dogs all day and all night, operating as fast as they can, one right after the other, as hundreds of people have needs in these countries. It's a beautiful thing. So if you want to help us, here's the address, and that's just one of the things. If you're a 700 Club member, we're helping, and I'm hoping, by the way, in Operation Blessing, I want to double how much we were giving last year in 1989. This is going to be a great year. We just want to increase the level of what we're doing. You know something, ladies and gentlemen, I was reading this morning in the book of Judges, and in Judges, it tells about some old leaders. Joshua, for example, and the people who knew Joshua, when the Israelites came into the land, they saw the power of God. Now, here's what the Bible says. It's kind of a sad commentary about what happens, but it can happen here in America too, and that's why I want to show it to you. This is the book of Judges, the 2nd chapter, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, who had seen all the great work of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. That happens to older people, they die. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. And then you have a story of a nation going into apostasy, following idols, intermarrying with heathen people, and receiving the judgment of God constantly, one time after the other. Now, is this happening in America? Absolutely. It's happening in our schools. I was reading this morning that a survey was made of students, and only 1 out of 4 students in America could define what profits were. For example, they didn't know anything about economics. They don't know anything about geography. 75% of our people don't know where the Persian Gulf is. And at least 100 million or more never read the Bible. Never read the Bible. Now, what's the answer? The answer is, in our society, just like in the other society, young people. Young people. Well, I want to introduce to you a young person who was like so many in our colleges. He was no ordinary young man, though. He had exceptional achievements throughout high school.